Good evening. My research paper was on the impact that high-stakes, large-scale assessments have on instruction through curriculum narrowing. Curriculum narrowing is basically where certain skills or subjects are neglected in order to prepare students for the high-stakes exam. So I decided to look through the lens of emergent bilinguals that have been pretty much submerged in English instruction. So I decided to look at the Thomas and Collier, findings, where we see that students who are immersed at an earlier age or mainstreamed at an earlier age have a harder time closing the achievement gap. That's pretty much the smallest the gap will ever be, is when they're in kindergarten. And as they go through their school career, the gap widens even further. So when we're considering, this population in particular, I had to think, well, what's the kind of instruction they should be receiving? And I referenced Ofelia Garcia's research that says that the curriculum for emergent bilinguals should be transformative, it should be creative, it should be collaborative, it should be engaging, but it should be challenging, so we don't water anything down. And when we're thinking of this kind of instruction, we're also thinking of instruction that's going to prepare students for jobs, for the 21st century. We don't know a lot of the jobs that will exist by the time that they are they're past their school career. So we have to think in mind of helping them be creative and helping them think beyond the box. But when we're measured through high stakes assessment, that pretty much limits, how far we can get into those creative pedagogies. So with the stress from Nicholby, it's gotten, a push for the high stakes achievement for success, right? And this is what's going to measure the school success, the district success, the teacher success, the student success. And so this is what teachers tend to push for, is success on this particular assessment. But this is leading to the narrowing of curriculum. For example, when certain skills or certain genres are what are prioritized, if a certain genre, for example, is not assessed in a certain grade, they're probably not going to see it. If, for example, even in writing the genres, they're mainly exposed to expository writing, where, what about the creative writing? Even when they did have narrative writing, they couldn't get, as far as fantasy, like saying write about unicorns or aliens. They had to stick to something that was realistic. So I think we're pretty much closing in that box and not allowing them to think beyond it. This also goes with the subjects that are not taught, not just the skills or genres, but then comes, okay, well, this subject is not taught in this grade level, so I have to focus on this. For example, in third grade, if writing is not assessed, well, the language arts teacher will focus mainly on reading. But then the subsequent grade teacher in fourth grade will have to teach a lot of the writing skills, which is another reason why there aren't very many students that receive 4s on the fourth grade writing assessment, because they're trying to pack in all the teaks, not just from that fourth grade level, but from the previous grade level. The same goes with the science and with the social studies assessment. So this is again limiting how much they can teach. Plus, it limits the vocabulary. We have the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 vocabulary. Tier 1 for the communication. Tier 2 is the vocabulary that can go beyond the domains of science and math. For example, function can go into math and can also go into the function of an ecosystem, an organism, or the way that we function in any type of society. So those kinds of words are based on the way that they can go across domains. Then we have those that are domain specific, such as Jim Crow, such as ribosome. These kinds of words are specific to the content. And if we can't teach a certain subject, well, they're not going to be exposed to those vocabulary, but then they're going to be missing those opportunities on how they can connect across domains. And so we're limiting their lexicon, but we're limiting those connections as well, which is limiting the comprehension. So it also goes to show us that it's sad that they're missing these skills in a certain subject based on what's tested, and it's sad that they're missing the subject areas. And it's also sad that the way that they're assessed is only going to be as far as, the mirror of whatever the star looks like. So the kinds of assessment that would be formative throughout the school year, I mean, they're going to be looking at the weekly test, the 6 weeks test, the benchmarks, and they're all pretty much reflective of what a STAR test would look like. instead of looking at the other forms of assessment, like the teacher interviews, those kinds of writing conferences, teacher-student conferences. Those assessments are not going to be given as much weight in a grade book as far as, more than whatever mirrors the kind of assessment. And, so then we start to see that this is also going to limit the view of the child. And this is going to again reinforce the idea that they're not capable. Well, look at their scores. They're constantly, scoring lower. But again, according to a measure that probably doesn't capture the student holistically. So this is where we get our higher percentage of special ed, and this is where we get our lower percentage of representation of emergent bilinguals in gifted and talented as well. And it's going to be a continuous cycle because it's based on grades that come from assessments that mirror the large scale. And so probably the saddest part was that the students lose their love of learning. And we see that as teachers, we try to capture the heart and then the mind. And that affective filter can't be nurtured enough. But if they're constantly feeling like failures and they're constantly feeling like their teacher sees them this way, or that the school sees them this way, that the state sees them this way, they're going to lose their love of learning. And those aha moments and those moments where they light up are going to be less and less and fewer and far between. And so it's a very sad thing when we start seeing, that joy extinguished from them, especially when we love to see them light up with our classes or our instruction and whatever they've learned. And when they realize that they are capable, those moments are what we strive for, because those moments will entice that intrinsic motivation. And, we have to go extrinsic with tickets or with sorts of rewards, but when it becomes intrinsic, that's what we're truly after, because that's what's transformative. But again, this is where we don't get to see that, and they don't get to show what one of the writers had said, something like their intellectual passion, because they can't demonstrate it maybe like through a presentation or through a video or through a dramatization or some sort of creation that they can express their genius. Those ideas, those opportunities are less. So we see the teachers' perspectives where they're frustrated and they want to be able to balance, between how do I get them to achieve on this test that's going to follow them forever, and how do I provide these opportunities where they're going to grow better. And I think that the biggest thing that I took away from this is that in the long term, it's creating a bigger marginalization of the language minorities, and it's a greater risk of widening that marginalization, that gap between the social groups. One of the authors mentioning widening the social divides if you're taking out the liberal arts from public schools, while the private schools are getting all this exposure to these, the liberal arts and to other courses, and they're not necessarily experiencing the narrowing of curriculum because they don't have the state assessment. Whereas the poorer schools, they're going to be skill drilled and filling out bubbles on test sheets, and that's what they're going to be able to do when they leave high school. But is that really preparing them for the world beyond, for the world that's going to have jobs that we still have yet heard of? We're going back to that one-room schoolhouse where everything is just set, for them. And again, we're not preparing them for the jobs that existed then. We're preparing them for the jobs that exist now. And again, we're not preparing them to compete at a global workforce. Instead, we're reinforcing Freire's what he mentions as the banking system, and reinforcing that pedagogy of oppression, which I think we need to have that advocacy. And like Dr. Izquierdo, where I mentioned that sometimes it does feel like a losing battle, where you want to give up, but again, remembering that the students do deserve this, especially when our future society is in their hands. Well, we want to prepare what's best, for our country and for those that, are coming into it, and they can grow from it and add to our country as well. But again, if this is the way that we prepare our students, then something has to change in the form of assessment, in the form of accountability, because it's leading to this in instruction and poorer outcomes and poorer educational experiences. That's not reflective of what Garcia would call creative, challenging, transformative, and collaborative curriculum. Thank you. That's my reflection.